All right, well, we'll get started just to respect everybody's time. I know everyone's busy and carved out this piece um, of your day to day to be with us and share your knowledge and expertise. So thank you for that. And good afternoon to you all and to everyone who's joining us today. We're excited to have this conversation and to have everybody be part of this conversation today. My name is Raul Alvarez, Executive Director for CAN, the Community Advancement Network. And CAN is a network of 26 agencies, kind of government and nonprofit, who come together to identify actions we can take to advance community well-being, equity and opportunity through collaboration. And we want to do this by aligning efforts and leveraging resources, right, and working collectively. And so this is the shameless plug part of the of the program where I talk about all things CAN. But I'll keep it quick just to show you a little bit of the kind of resources and tools that we provide and we develop and share with the community. And I'll see if it's possible for me to share. Yay, I can. Again, I'll unshare so that I can click all the right buttons. Happens to me every time. Okay, here we go. And there's the slideshow button. All right, again, thank you for joining us for this installment of our Expanding Opportunity Forum series. It's our third forum this year, and I think, we'll continue with this conversation in the fall, once we kind of digest all of the learnings from these initial forums and from our summit. And then we'll kind of do some follow-up in the fall on some more targeted issues that can move us forward, economically in a more equitable way. But here's a little bit about CAN. This is just a screenshot of our website, but for me, it's the easiest way to kind of talk about CAN, so you can see kind of how to get to the tools and resources we provide. So CAN, like I said, it's a network of 26 agencies, again, who want to improve community well-being, right? Social, health, educational, and economic opportunity. And we want to do so through partnership and collaboration. So the buttons there are the key tools we provide. You have our dashboard, CAN dashboard, with it's a community well-being indicator or community indicators report of 18 indicators of community well-being. On the other end, you have our podcast, which is called Get Engaged, and it's really a weekly calendar of activities of interest, right, to folks who want to improve community well-being. And it's like a 10-minute podcast, so it's not a huge commitment of time. So if you're into listening to newsletters and not reading them on email, that might be an option. And we have an equity blog and a variety of toolkits. And under our initiatives section here is where you could find all of the materials for our forums, under Central Texas Regional Summit, because these forums are an extension of that summit. So, and again, our canatx.org is our website. So, so excited just to kind of share a little something about CAN, but really want to dive into the conversation with our panelists today. And just to explain the context, right, of this conversation. This forum is part of a broader series building on the Central Texas Regional Summit that we hosted in November of last year. The theme of the summit was ensuring an equitable economic recovery, with the intent being to identify how we might approach the economic recovery from the pandemic differently from the ways we have approached kind of economic development in the past, taking into account the equity considerations and other challenges that arose during the pandemic. And the hope is that we look at the challenge more holistically so that solutions we pursue can also be more holistic and more coordinated, and hopefully as a result, more effective. And we do have a recording of our November summit on the website under that initiatives tab. And our 2 previous expanding opportunity forums are also recorded and can be viewed at the same website. And the previous forums focused on the theme of communities of color in the post-pandemic economic recovery, which was the first forum. And the second forum was building a family-friendly workplace as a strategy for attracting and retaining employees, which is, again, the theme for the second forum. And the forum today is focused on economic challenges faced by women during the pandemic and now coming out of the pandemic. It was quite evident very early on in the pandemic that women were adversely affected kind of in a disproportionate way. And I look forward to delving into that during today's forum. We will take stock again of all we've learned from the summit and these expanding opportunity forums, and we'll follow up in the fall with forums that will allow us to keep the focus on the right issues and hopefully keep us moving in the right direction. So now it wouldn't be a canned forum if I didn't start with some data and research to set the stage, but not a lot of slides. It's just a few slides. So let's get to it so we can get to our conversation with the exciting panel that we've assembled for today's forum. Go back and hopefully, let's see. There we go. So we kind of draw from a couple of, recent, and by that I mean 2021 or 2022, right? Reports, or research, and this is from McKinsey and Company, and this was from 2021, but it was trying, again, it's just kind of the state of the women in the workplace, which is an annual report that they put out, and the summary, at least, again, very rough summary because it's a very lengthy report, and these are 4 bullet points. But some takeaways, right, is in terms of representation in the workplace, kind of women made gains, but obviously we're not at parity, and burnout is kind of on the rise, which sort of threatens some of the gains, right? In terms of leadership, recognition, and challenges, women managers tend to do more to support their teams. They're rising to be strong leaders, but their work isn't recognized. And women leaders take on more work, but also face greater challenges. In the workplace, women tend to be more active champions for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And women of color in the workplace face even greater challenges, right? Because of, being a woman and a person of color in the workplace. And so this is a different report, which was published in September, but it really was looking at the gender wage gap in 2020, which, was the first year of the pandemic. And so you do see that comparing 2019 and 2020, right, it's there is a returning, right, to kind of those kind of level of earnings that, or at least the ratio of earnings, right, compared to the earning of males before the pandemic. But again, that still is 20 points lower than it should be, right? It should be 100%, right? But we're looking at these numbers that are, in the 80s and lower, right? If you compare kind of women of color with white male earnings. So again, part of the thing to discuss, right, is if we're getting back to quote unquote normal, is that really a good thing, right? Just to, and this from the same report, couple of key takeaways. COVID-19 led to disproportionate job loss among the lowest paid women. The median annual earnings of all women fell by 1.2%, while men's earnings did not. And that's in 2020. And racial and gender wage gaps remain profound. And that's what that chart was meant to show. And then one statistic about, when will we be when will we cut the gap or reduce the gap or eliminate the gap? And at the current rate, it'll take 39 years, right, for women's earnings to reach the same level as men. So not only, right, a pandemic related issue, but obviously a systemic issue as well. And this is the last kind of research or excerpts from reports that I'll share before kind of moving on to our panel. But a couple of charts that just show the gap. This is men and women's employment, right, over the course of COVID-19, right? So you see that men are almost getting right to the February. I think this is February 2020 to February 2022. So men are closer to kind of the rate of employment than women are, right, compared to 2 years ago. And obviously you see the gap there in employment between men and women in those two lines. This is comparing women's employment by educational attainment. And sort of the lightest of the lines, right, is women with a high school degree or less. And the one in the middle is women with some college. And then the darker of the lines is women with a college degree and more. And there, obviously, I think what stands out is the women with the college degree have achieved a higher level than 2 years ago. But women with some college or no college, right, are still not back to where we were before February of 2020. And then it's a similar chart, but tracking race and employment by race and ethnicity before the pandemic and now, this year. So the blue line there kind of shows where African-American women are, right, relative to where we were February 2020. And then Hispanics is the yellow line, and they're just about, Hispanic women are the level right at the time when the pandemic started. So, and that's what, let's see. Yeah, so I'll come back to those slides about kind of solutions. But wanted to share set the context and put some information out there to spark kind of our conversation. So thanks for letting me do that and just set the stage. We'll now switch over to our panel discussion, and again, hopefully, the context kind of helps inform the conversation. But I'll do a quick intro of our panelists, and then we'll get into a little Q&A with them and Q&A with the audience. So the first person I'll introduce is Dr. Belinda Roman, who's an assistant professor of economics at St. Mary's University, and she's a member of the American Economic Association and its Committee on the Status of Minority Groups in Economic Professions, and the Committee on the Status of Minority Groups in the economic profession, which is the same committee I just mentioned. So Dr. Roman also holds membership in the American Society of Hispanic Economists, serving on their Communications Committee and the International Federation of Feminist Economics. Our second speaker is Diana Melendez. Welcome, Diana. Practicing attorney and member of the Women of Color Collective and the City of Austin Commission for Women. And many hats. All of our presenters wear many hats, just as we know the women in our families, in our communities also wear many hats and carry a lot of water in terms of kind of getting things done and addressing key issues. But Diana is driven by her experiences as an advocate for immigrant and low-income communities and her own personal journey. And as a result, she founded her own law firm and focuses her law practice on serving immigrant and BIPOC entrepreneurs by helping them set up a solid legal foundation that will protect their business and wealth. And our third speaker is Atene Robinson. Welcome, Otany, and thanks for being a part of this. And Otany is an entrepreneur and and works in the customer service industry. So she can share her views, right, as both a worker and an entrepreneur, right, who had very unique experiences, I'm sure, during this whole pandemic thing that we all lived through. Thankfully, we're on this side of it, and but she's worked in customer service for over 3 years. And in addition to working full time, right, she also works to manage and build her own business. So her passion is profoundly rooted in entrepreneurship and social justice, and considers her mission to serve others. So thank you all again for taking time out. You're doing some great work out there, and thank you for, again, just being here to help inform this conversation, and hopefully help us to identify solutions or strategies that can help us expand opportunity. That's the name of the forum, right? So that's the intent in which we go into the conversation. So thanks for carving out time from your busy schedules, kind of both professionally and personally and civically, right? All of those things you do in your lives. So so I kind of struggled with how do I, do I tailor questions to each speaker, or do we kind of have a round robin on a couple of different topics? So I think we decided to kind of pose a question and allow our panelists to address the question. So the first round, or the first question that kind of I want to pose to our panelists is, and you've seen the data I just presented, right? It hints at the fact that we're kind of close to pre-pandemic, quote unquote, normal, right? Which maybe was normal, but not equitable, right? And, but is the data or information to which you have access, right, pointing to this return to normal, right? It does, based on the work you're doing, or what you see happening in the community, is the data really reflecting, right, your experience, or is there a disconnect, right, between what the data suggests and where you feel things really stand? And it's pretty broad, right? But I do think, that's my reaction, right? When I see the data, it's like, in my gut, it feels different, right? But I see the data, and I know that those are numbers, and someone, takes care in how they collect the data, but is that really where we are, right? So I'm gonna have each of our panelists address it, but I'll start with Dr. Roman.
Okay, thank you. And thank you very much for inviting me to participate in today's event. Well, I think the data are, they're limited in what they can tell us about what's actually happening to people. I mean, they're points in time, as opposed to that fluid sort of, this is what I'm experiencing. But plus, they're points in time that are behind us rather than contemporaneous or moving forward. So, I'm in two minds. Data's good, but I'm also leery about some of the things that we want to draw from them, and maybe consider thinking about what other data sets we might be able to use to help us inform and kind of fill in those gaps, and find out how people are feeling about their own situations. Because, while I can say this is what I think, it's really about what people are experiencing and what they're communicating to us about what they're doing. So those surveys that are like household surveys that happen almost weekly by the census, I think maybe more representative and indicative of how people are feeling about their positions, and whether or not we're back to normal, or if that normal is completely gone and we need to redefine it. So that would be my first reaction to the question.
Diana, any thoughts that you would share just on that question of what the numbers reflect, right? Or at least the numbers I presented.
Sure. Yeah, I agree with Belinda. I think it's, every situation is different. And I do feel like maybe the day-to-day has become a little bit more normal, right? Like there are more opportunities to meet in person. There's, it feels like things are back to life in terms of like socially, and organizations planning events. And so I think that might be right, but I think we tend to forget now, as it feels normal, what those like long-term effects are and will be because of the pandemic.
And Otany, any thoughts on just this idea of, again, at least in terms of whatever wages and employment, right? Sort of being back to kind of normal or pre-pandemic sort of levels.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I definitely agree. Can you guys hear me okay?
Mm.
I don't know. Perfect. I definitely agree with these beautiful ladies here, very much so well educated as well, on this question. But the question is it's really what is I feel like we're in this new normal. Things are not going to be the same as they were a year ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, right? So we've shifted. It's like shuffling the deck. We're in this whole new normal. And I agree with Diana when she says, we're having a lot of more opportunities for people to do things that they want. And then on top of that, we got technology, we have social media. So there's a lot. We're in this whole new normal. And that phrase is actually, don't judge me, but the phrase is actually on Google. It's called the new normal. We're not in this same time that we were before. And that's just how things change and things continue to evolve. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think that's, just one of the, and again, maybe we're in Austin also, right? So I think, the economic recovery these are national numbers, right? So in Austin, the economic recovery is on steroids. So it's like 2 or 3 or more times, right? In terms of the challenge, you know what I mean? The good parts of it and then the challenges of it, right? Because we don't see everyone kind of benefiting equally. And so I think, when we picked the topic of ensuring equitable economic recovery, right, we were still in the middle of COVID, right? It was right before Omicron when we had the summit. It was November 4th or 5th. And literally it was the lowest COVID cases, that we had since the pandemic started, right? And I think, which was luck, right? Because we just picked the date and we didn't know what was going to happen, right? But I think that there was this sense of, not forgetting, right? Or, just kind of documenting what we were experiencing and what we learned, and not having, again, not just wishing for it to be back to normal, right? And ignoring everything we were learning or seeing or experiencing. So I think that's part of kind of why we wanted to, even before we got out of the pandemic, well, let's start kind of talking about, what groups, within our community are facing what kind of struggles, so that we can start planning for, the kind of recovery we want, or relief and supports that we want to see, given who's struggling right during the pandemic. So before really kind of getting to kind of solutions, what do we need to do? But, so for me, just to honor that sort of what we've been through, was there anything you experienced or anything you're aware about that women, experienced during the pandemic that you would want our audience to know, or that you don't want people to forget? For me, it's like, how do we not forget all of these things we learned about equity and about, women and, economic opportunity and all of those barriers and challenges that were magnified, and things that you don't want to get brushed aside, right? And for me, that's, I think we all had that lingering feeling, right? Is that we're getting, everyone seems to care right now, but as soon as the economy improves, people are going to go back to, just doing things, business as usual, right? So I don't know if there's anything you want to share, about that, maybe learnings during the pandemic, right? That maybe as we all yearn or want to go back to the previous normal, that you don't want us to forget, right? We can't forget this happened during the pandemic. That should inform, right, the conversations we're having at this moment. So anything you'd like to share, Diana, about that?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I think we have to acknowledge the resiliency of women, right? I think throughout the pandemic, we've seen, like you said earlier, just women take on so many roles and also face, unique challenges where women tend to take on the role of childcare, right? And so having to navigate that while having a full-time job, or even as business owners, I think what I would not want people to forget is just how, like, women have been disproportionately affected, and especially women of color have been adversely affected, women of color business owners as well, right? I think there's information out there where women of color tend to receive or are rejected 2 times as more likely to be rejected for loans for their business. And so not having that, or having that difficulty even before the pandemic, and how that was exacerbated during the pandemic is, I think, important to acknowledge, and to also, as I mentioned earlier, be aware of the long-term effects that that has, right? Like the limited access to resources, to information, to mentorship was just, during the pandemic, was just so much more extremely limited. And so that took a toll on businesses during the pandemic, and it will take a toll long term, because it'll be harder for those businesses to get back on track. And so I think that's what I want to pinpoint, or at least just focus on right now, so that we don't forget that those effects are still going to be with us as we try to get out, or as if, in the new normal, try to get out of this pandemic, that we are still going to see the effects of that. And I think also it's important to note just the contrast, right, between certain communities. So the lower income people took on more debt, for instance, right? Whereas upper income people actually saved money through the pandemic. And so I think that's also just important to note in terms of like the wealth gap between communities as well.
Yeah, thank you. Those are incredible points. And I think Dr. Roman, is there anything you would share about we might, it'd be best for us not to forget, right, or not to brush aside, right? And again, this is very high level still. But I do think it's important for us to, again, the learning part of it, is to at least kind of put things on the record, right? So that when we get to the solutions phase, right, that those remain part of the conversation.
Absolutely, yeah. I think one of the things that I've been working on and thinking about is the connections between all the different levels of women that we see. So at least for us here in San Antonio, I've been working with a group of women who are completely disenfranchised and in the shadows, and yet they're caregivers or childminders to women that are in the professional sector. And so their fragility, as well as the fact that they're just not seen, has made me really wonder about the questions of equity and inclusiveness, and what strategies we might be able to come up with that integrate everyone into the social fabric of our cities. Some of these ladies are in 45 to 55, so they're no longer in that range of young entrepreneurial spirit, but they are still so integral to a lot of the families and a lot of things they do. And so this pandemic has kind of once again shown us where that foundation is in our economy that's not even being talked about yet and dealt with, because it hasn't been formalized. So that's one thing I really hope we think about.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. And Otany, anything you would share about key learnings or takeaways or things to make sure we keep front of mind about that we learned during the pandemic?
Absolutely. This is what you asked, a great question, Raul, here. And I don't want people to brush aside or forget that. And Diana said it. It was a great answer. Resiliency. That's amazing, because who runs the world? Women, right? That's what Beyonce says. But mental health is real. And I can really only talk about my personal experiences and what I've seen my friends and the women in my family go through. Mental health is real, and I really want that to sink in. We as women, we play numerous roles: daughters, mothers, aunts, you know, and not putting our health, our mental health first, creates issues down the line, right? So for me, I worked in the airline industry when COVID hit. As we all see and know, the airline industry has just went to, it's a mess. It's crazy right now. I ended up getting furloughed without pay for my job. So I was left, okay, well, you know, I don't have any children, but how am I going to pay my bills? How am I going to make it day to day? So I became depressed. My mental health began to sink. I mean, nobody ever saw COVID coming, right? So it was kind of like, even the little savings that I did have was like, it still wasn't enough to survive this, because at the time we didn't know what the end was going to look like for anybody. And I didn't know what that was going to look like for me. So my mental health plummeted. So with that being said, stress, I got stressed out. Stress leads to what? Physical illness.
Mhm.
You know, so it's like a cycle. It's like a cycle, and it's hard to break, especially when you don't have access or assistance for the things that you may need. So let's not forget mental health and how important it is. Now, we were thinking about mental health before COVID, for sure, you know. But this is a time now than ever that we need to really be focusing on mental health. I mean, think about the children. I mean, every month I get online and I'll read an article about a kid committing suicide or a kid shooting up the school. You know, so it's a lot. But I don't want people to forget that, you know, our mental health is how we think, act, and feel on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think it's, you know, that is one of the recurring themes and during the pandemic, right? Because it was very intense. You know, there was a lot of hardship and loss on so many different levels. And that is actually the other priority issue that CAN selected, you know, sort of parallel to ensuring an equitable economic recovery is addressing community mental health and wellness. Well, because it literally has affected all of us, right? The pandemic has, and it affects us as people and as workers, right? I mean, so an employer should care about the mental health and wellness, right, of their employees. So you can't separate, right, the two, but we did feel it was important enough to kind of put it alongside, right, the economic recovery, because there's, like you're saying, if you're not well from a health standpoint, it's going to be hard for you to be day in and day out, right, at work. And it's just been a compounding of experiences, right, of adverse experiences. And like I said, I kind of said it very quickly about, you know, how women hold it down, right, for the family and for the community. But, you know, holding it down means, right, being the strong one, right, being the rock. And it's kind of hard to always be that, you know, because you have your own you know what I mean, your own issues and emotions that you have to deal with. And so we're grateful, right, for all of that. But also, again, these are things we can't, I hate to always say brush aside, right? But sometimes it feels that's what's happening, right? We're just brushing it aside for the sake of getting back to the old way. And so I thank you for sharing that. Again, sometimes it's hard to reflect, right, on what was a very difficult sort of period for all of us. But I do think that's why, you know, I'm, you know, very passionate about trying to do something different, right, and not try the same things kind of we've tried that have had limited success, but approach things in a way that's different, so that we can see better results. And before kind of moving on to the next question, I think there was a question in the chat, Otany, about, or was it for Diana, or for anyone who wants to answer? I guess it's about examples of how there is no return to the old days or the old ways, right? Just based on, again, just where you are now and what your, what work or, what your life looks like now that wasn't like how it was before, right? If anything you share to address that. It's a question from the audience. And of course, I mean, the fact that we're on Zoom still, even though we could be in person, is one change. But and technology in general, I mean, I think it was a barrier during the pandemic, and I'm sure it was a barrier to women, just as it was a barrier to everyone else who doesn't have good technology access. Because again, we can have a great conversation right on Zoom here, but if you can't access this meeting right with the technology you have, then or don't know how, right? Don't know how to navigate, or don't have access to the Zoom, free or otherwise, right? Then again, these are some things obviously that are different. But anything you would share, Diana, or any of our panelists about how we haven't gone back all the way, right, to as much as we may want to or think we have.
Sure, I can share. In terms of like my work as an attorney, it's a little unique for me because I work for myself, so it's just me right now. But what I've noticed with other attorneys or just colleagues in general is that it just depends, right? So for business attorneys, it's easier to have more sophisticated clients, access to technology, and so it was not a difficult transition. Maybe in the beginning, we weren't used to it, but it was easy for us to connect with clients via Zoom, via email, via phone, without having to meet in person, right? And that actually helped a lot of, attorneys who were like in the office, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. at sometimes, right? And so that could have benefited them in that sense. However, we have perhaps other types of attorneys who are immigration attorneys, for instance, where clients might prefer to meet in person, and also the immigrant community or lower income community might be the ones that were most exposed also to COVID, right? Their families, and so it was a risk, and so I think just learning to, or just seeing the way that different types of attorneys navigated that was really interesting. But I guess in terms of now, a concern has been the hybrid environment, right? And especially in terms of if you're working for a larger company or firm, if you do some sort of hybrid work environment, how does that affect perhaps the women who prefer to stay home 3 to 4 days a week and not go to the office and never see the boss or supervisor or et cetera, right? And so you don't get the same face time as others who might not have to deal or take care of their families, loved ones at home, and how that might affect, how that might affect us as women, because we tend to do that, stay or prefer to do that now that we are able to stay at home and take care of loved ones, as opposed to having to go into the office, sit in traffic for an hour, et cetera, right? And so I think that's where we're seeing, at least what I'm seeing with my colleagues, is that it's a concern for women.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
for saying that. Go ahead, Otany.
And to kind of feed off of that, there's a new normal. I don't think we could ever go back to 2019 to 2020. I mean, I wouldn't want to repeat last year or the year before that, right? So I don't know if it's a psychology thing, if our brains are just wired that way. I mean, we went through a lot with this whole COVID and pandemic hardship, and everybody is just ready to get past it, right? So I just lost my train of thought with this question, sorry. But I just think there's forget the old, we're in with the new, right? And it's time to, aside from what the data says, the data is great, but we also have to start thinking about these human connections. Now, this is the anthropologist. I graduated a degree with anthropology, so I'm all about sitting down with people, having these type of conversations to really understand their day-to-day life, you know, so, and what's normal to them, because everybody has a different definition of what normal is, you know. Is that a universal term, or is that just based off of somebody's perspective? So yeah.
Great, thank you. Anything, Belinda, on the new or the new way versus the old way? Again, where you've already seen that things have changed and not gone back to kind of the way we're doing them.
Yeah, I mean, in education and in other areas, there was already a kind of a move towards more technology and integrating technology with learning, and perhaps even supplanting face-to-face learning with technology. So the pandemic was, you know, the perfect experiment in many ways for that. What I thought was quite interesting was the student response was, I'd rather be in the classroom than always be on technology. And you know, I'd like to think that that's because they wanted to see me, but I think it was more that they wanted to be socializing with their classmates, and how important that was, that continues to be actually for them, to have that sense of belonging and camaraderie, collegiality, that you just, yes, it's, you know, we can do it this way, but I think there's something about that physical presence that makes a very big difference for, you know, the cohorts, and as well, even the faculty. We all, you know, we all are, we're social beings at the end of the day. So being in the presence of someone makes, I'd never go back to 100% classrooms, everybody sitting like we used to, but there'll be some middle ground, and maybe it's for the next cohorts to kind of define how much they want to do of each, and let everybody else know.
Absolutely, yeah. We're still struggling with how can we have this forum in person for those who want to be in person, but also allow the virtual participation, and whether it's our, again, a big forum like this, or like our community council, right, or our work group that looks at mental health, or language access, or, you know, we have a variety of work groups. But how do you start, you know, making that hybrid, you know, an option? So, so again, I think there's some good and some challenges that come with all of that. But we did have a question from someone from the audience before I go to kind of the last question about sort of kind of solutions. But this is to all the panelists: is what advice and encouragement would you give to a middle-aged ethnic woman who struggles with interactions with a predominantly younger white staff remotely? So again, there's a lot of layers there, right? There's the race, and then there's the age, and then there's the remote, right, part of it as well. So a lot to digest in the question, but any takers for now? We can come back to it if yeah.
Is it a legal question?
That's right. That's right.
You're right. I mean, I think it's just, I'm not sure. It's going to be hard on technology anyway, because, you know, for those of us that are, you know, a little bit older and are used to working in a slightly different environment, it's hard to get used to your colleagues looking at their cell phones. You can tell they're not paying attention to you and all that sort of stuff. And it might not necessarily mean that they're not paying attention to you in the way that you're used to. They may just be, you know, distracted, multitask, triple tasking, however many tasks there is. But I suppose to me, I think ground rules are important. It's like, if we're going to have a business meeting, we're going to do something with them, you need to give me your time for 15-20 minutes and put everything else away so that we can get the business of the day done, especially you know, in the business sector. where if it's a more free-flowing activity, you know, in an academic setting where you want people to engage, then maybe you can be a little less structured. But you know, you maybe, I don't know, those that are in business have a, you know, perspective on how they want, how it's going to happen. I'm sure an attorney or in your own business, you want people's attention for a certain amount of time to convey what it is you need to convey.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts just on, you know, just kind of relating kind of across age or across race and in a virtual environment?
Yeah, I think I can add a couple of things. I think first, and you know, I don't know exactly what you mean, like which type of interactions for the person who asked the question, but I think there are different, like you said earlier, like layers, right? And so it would mean, depending on what you need as part of your, you know, that environment, is perhaps talking to a supervisor or somebody who might be an ally to help you approach certain subjects or topics that you might want to address with the staff. And, you know, maybe your company isn't doing enough to promote a healthy work environment for people of color. And that might be, you know, a bigger conversation that you need to have, unfortunately. And so it just kind of depends exactly on what those interactions you want with the staff is I guess my main question. But also separate from that, you know, I know, like, I'm also, as Raul mentioned earlier, the co-founder of a Women of Color collective here in Austin. And so we do get a lot of women of color who work in, for instance, tech companies who, and they're primarily, usually, the only woman of color in this space, right? And so they have to confront that space every single day. And so what they do is they're intentional about seeking spaces that are comfortable to them outside of work. And a lot of the times, fortunately, that has been the events that we create through my community, through the Women of Color Collective. And what the feedback that I've heard from that is that when they do that, they gain kind of their power back. You know, they're empowered to go back the next day and say, okay, this is who I am. This is who I want to be, you know, authentically in my job here, and not shy away from that. And so I also encourage you to try to find those spaces in other and outside your work so that you can talk to other women who are going through the same thing.
Right, thank you. Anything on that topic, Otany, before I go on to the to my final question, at least, and then we'll go back to some chat questions from the chat.
Okay. Yeah, I completely agree with these ladies here. Now, I don't have any experience with that type of environment, but what I could say, the best advice I can give would be to be you, be organic, and if you feel uncomfortable in any way, it needs to be addressed respectfully, of course, professionally as well. But yeah, you know, speak up and let's get some diversity in the room. It's 2022. That's how things should be anyway, in my opinion. But you know, unfortunately, some things that doesn't always happen. Unfortunately, that's not always the environment. But yeah, be the change you want to see. You know, so
yeah, and again, I think that's the race equity part is one that came up during the pandemic, right? You know, racial inequality, right? And stemming from a lot of what we were watching on TV unfold in our community and others' communities. And so it's kind of how do you get your employer, who you work for, to create a more, an environment that's more respectful, right, of people of color, right? You know, not just as people, but as workers, and how they can succeed in the workplace and actually move up the chain, you know, up the ladder, right, and have opportunities, right, to improve their skills, right, and to improve, you know, the role that they play. So I do think, you know, making sure that these issues are brought up with the, you know, the supervisors through the right channels or through creating ally groups or creating affinity groups, right? I mean, I think definitely, I think the racial equality piece is, overlays this conversation to a huge degree, right? Because women struggled, a certain way during the pandemic, but women of color struggled, that much more because of having to deal with, race and gender, and other factors, right? Other demographics, right? That they may represent. But thanks for attempting to answer all these questions. I know that they're not. It's not like doing basic addition here, right? We're doing the complex math here. But I did want to, just before we kind of we will take a few more questions from the chat if folks want to put questions there. But I did want to look at from one of these reports some of the solutions or things that folks, and it's from this same report, kind of ensuring, and I can't actually read the title because it's blocked, but this ensuring women's report right there. Let's see. So again, these are some of from the Center for American Progress, right? This report from earlier this year, and some of the things they suggest in that report. And again, we'll share this these slides, right, via chat with attendees. But here, it's a list of 10. So right, these are the first 5, right? Childcare. Someone mentioned in the chat about childcare, and childcare has come up in our first 2 expanding opportunity forums, right? Whether we're talking about entrepreneurs or whether we're talking about communities of color, right? In the creating a family-friendly workplace, clearly childcare is very important in that context of retaining, right, and attracting employees who want some of those family-friendly policies and benefits. You got paid family medical leave, right? These are some of the same things we talked about in the last forum on building a family-friendly workplace, but from a totally different source, which means we may be onto something, right? Building a family-friendly workplace. If these issues and topics keep coming up, then maybe there's we should pay attention to that. The flexible workplace policies and scheduling, right, of work time, closing the gender wage gap by strengthening equal pay protections, addressing pay discrimination, not looking at kind of salary history, which again are impediments, right, to getting really fair pay, especially if you do have those historical kind of gender pay gaps. Pay better, provide more benefits, right, for frontline jobs, which disproportionately affect women or employ women, I should say. And then, ensure that your workplace and workforce hiring programs recruit, place, and retain women, intentionally, make higher education more affordable and equitable, look at our minimum wage. I know that's been a serious conversation here locally. There's a big push around, it might be more than $15 an hour now, but I know that was a push leading up to the pandemic. And then employment and protections for non-traditional workers, which are part-time, independent contractors and temporary workers, and strengthen and enforce protections against discrimination, harassment, and retaliation. So these are some ideas, right, that that this report at least puts out there. But I really just wanted to pose the question, right, to y'all: is of these things that are listed, what's missing, right? What did you see there that came into your mind but wasn't listed, and or what's most important, right? If you do think they're onto something, then what is most important, or just really think you feel merits attention, right? As part of the solution, right, of this, around this whole topic of equitable economic recovery. And I don't remember the order anymore, but I think
Otany is up first.
Otany. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so great list, by the way. I mean, all of them are important. I couldn't sit here and pick and tell you, oh, this is more important than the other. No, they're all needed and they're all important. However, what I found missing was holding these businesses and organizations accountable. Accountability, essentially. You know, we can put this on paper, we can make it a law, we can make it legal, we can make it a policy, but who's really holding these organizations or businesses accountable for actually implementing these policies? Having an open book and open door policy where people can come in and talk to their managers or boss about these type of things, you know, versus handing them a thick policy book telling them to go home and read this because this is what you're going to need to know for the job or whatever have you, but just having that conversational open door, open book policy to where people feel comfortable addressing these issues in the workplace, if that makes sense. I hope I answered the question. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Dr. Roman, any thoughts on that collection of strategies or?
I'm thinking that maybe some of them, given where we are right now, especially in a state like Texas and Oklahoma, that maybe what we want to do is make things like access to high quality, affordable childcare, high quality, affordable healthcare, or basic healthcare for women that is kind of larger in scope than a few things. I'm trying to be delicate about how to say it, but you know, there's a definite second-class citizen in this country based on some of the state rules, and that's just not acceptable. And I think the treatment of women maybe should be handled in the same way that we made a commitment to K through 12 education across the country. Everybody gets access to public education, so everyone should get access to some form of public health care that's a baseline. So maybe more access to basic services that's funded the same way we fund public education. Because clearly, if we leave it up to the states and this patchwork of governments, it's not going to happen in a way that everybody's equal. You go up the road from San Antonio and you're treated differently from you are here. So I think that's unacceptable, and somehow we need to level that playing field. And so maybe just kind of packaging the ideas up a little bit differently.
Great, thank you. Diana, anything you'd share on that subject?
Yeah, I definitely agree with the other panelists. I think accountability is so important. I think one of the points that was on your list was like strengthen, I think it was like protections against discrimination, harassment. I think that just encompasses everything, right? Because like the systems in general work against women. And so I think going back, in my view, as perspective as a small business attorney and things like that, like, how do we implement more fair practices in a bank where they're not giving loans to women of color to help develop their businesses, right? And so like we can, of course, like, be grandiose and say all these things, but really like we need in every single level and layer of government to be represented by us so that we can enforce these policies.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, just because I mean, there's just a lot of things that have surfaced that again, most of this stuff we knew already, right? But it just, it was magnified several times over. And I think, when, with childcare, again, so many times, right? It just, it comes up as a barrier, right? For folks, even, I happen to serve on the Early Child Care Council, so that's not the only reason I'm sharing it. But again, something as simple as childcare for non-traditional work hours, individuals who have non-traditional hours, right? They work in the evenings, they work on the weekends. There's no childcare for them, right? And again, in the service industry, hospitality industry, Austin is known for that. In hospitality, why don't we have more? You know what I mean? Why don't we have more support, for those folks who are propping up, right? Those very important industries for Austin, right? And again, every community probably has its own examples, right, of key industries, but trying to be, again, more solutions oriented, right? When we see an issue that comes up, then let's try to do something, right, or try to fill that gap or provide that service in a way that we haven't before. Which again, it's easier said than done, but I think it's especially with childcare, it comes up in every conversation, almost mental health and childcare, right? During the pandemic, and even right now at this point where we are with the pandemic, it comes up almost every conversation you have about what are we going to do to strengthen the community, right? So I definitely agree that these are things that we should keep advocating for and hold people accountable, right? I mean, it's we know these things, it's in the data, it's in the reports. Everybody wants to be data driven and research based, right? So this is what this research is telling us, which is part of the reason we share the research, right? Not just what Raul says or what Belinda says or what Diana says, right? Or Otany. So thank you. That was the Raul diatribe, right? But I, just some of these things, again, you want to do better, right? You want our community to do better. You want, and I do think there is an opportunity to do better because of where we are now and what we know now. And let's just keep pushing, right, so that we do see some of those changes. But there is one last question that I'll pose to y'all. And I do remember this movie.
Yes.
The movie 9 to 5. So now I'm dating myself, but first it was my diatribe and now I'm dating myself. But the question is, so how do we continue to have hope to fix these things when they've been issues for many years? And I guess that's what I was channeling a little bit in my rant. But we'll end with that question. If I don't have a particular order, but if anybody wants to weigh in, just on this idea of, being hopeful in that we can make things better. I think the data suggests there's gradual, right, improvement over time. But how do we not lose hope, right? How do we keep faith and keep working, right, and keep hope alive, as the Reverend Jesse Jackson might say, right? Any thoughts on that? How do you do it, right? How do you stay hopeful in doing the work that you do, right? And just kind of going through and keep moving forward.
Nothing. No comment. No. I think. Well, no. I think I've always felt we have to stay vigilant, because even once you think you've achieved or attained whatever it was you thought you needed to, it can very easily slip away. So it's always got to be, constant vigilance and a commitment to watching and making and ensuring that whatever remedies, they stay in place and they progress, because it's too easy to watch them slip away as well.
I agree with you as well, Belinda. We've had an amazing conversation, and hope, right? In the end, we have all of these issues, and it's like, this is a lot. It's a lot. I would say continue to be hopeful, have that resilience, and keep pushing. Have that vision, and don't let anybody or anyone or any system allow that to be dismantled. I don't remember Obama's slogan, but it was something regarding hope, right? And he ended up winning the election, whatever. That's politics. That's another thing. But, you know, we really got to hold ourselves as well as people, as locals, as communities accountable for one another. Building that teamwork to help one another and not rely on what the state or the government is going to say, but really helping our own community and then putting these people in power to hopefully make a change. But, you know, so.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Diana, any thoughts on that? Just it's almost closing comments, right? Because it's kind of one of those, how do we muster up the energy and sometimes it is just energy and not courage, right? You know, because of where we are and what we've been through, right? We kind of touched on mental health, right, already a little bit, right? And it's so how do you power through personally, but then also work on what are very difficult, you know, and challenging, you know, systemic issues. So any thoughts on that?
Sure. I think for me, the way I've maintained hope is just focusing on the small wins, right? I think that's like a practical kind of like day to day of like, how do I continue doing like difficult work? And I think it, you know, for instance, when I used to do immigration law, like somebody receiving their first work permit was a major win, right? And then also now where, I don't know, even if it's a personal issue, like a friend had the courage to ask for $10,000 more in their salary negotiation because of the information that's been out there, right? And so that's a win, not just for her, but for us as a community, right? And I think just really latching onto those moments because it is exhausting work, it is frustrating work, and it is stuff that if you see it every day, affects your mental health, right? Because it's discouraging. And so making sure that you talk to people who are doing the work and you share not just the venting, but also the wins, and making sure you're intentional about sharing those wins, because it could be that somebody, didn't get evicted today. And that's huge, right? And we just forget, because we're in these privileged positions, that other people are going through those systems right now as we speak. And we have really great people helping them. And so slowly but surely we're getting there. And I think that's just really important to remember for me personally. And I think is what I've seen collectively, empower us when we are intentional about reminding ourselves about those wins.
Yeah, so important. I mean, we just had our 10 celebration, right, last week, where we took time just to recognize, community leaders and collaborations, right, that are making an impact in our community, because we often focus on what isn't getting done and not as much on what is getting done. And when we started our Get Engaged podcast, that was part of the reason, right? During the pandemic, everybody felt isolated and felt like everybody wanted to help, but didn't know how, or felt like they were stuck, right? But then we started publicizing, well, there's still a lot of engagement happening, right? It's virtual, but there's still a lot of hard work happening in the community to address the needs, because, government was only doing so much, or was only being so effective, right, with the pandemic response. And even during the winter storm, right, there's just a lot of, I think, incredible stories of people who are so committed in the community to helping, individuals and just improving our community in general. Like, y'all are fine examples of that, just the work that you do, but also, again, just taking time to share your stories and to share your expertise. And I know there's a lot of other issues that require your attention, right? So, but even stuff, things like that, right, where people actually take time to share their stories and their expertise in a variety of ways, and all that for me is hopeful and inspiring, right? Your stories, and the stories of other folks who, notwithstanding the challenges, right, and the barriers, really just step up to make a difference and to, again, just to help, you know, advance community well-being, right? That's what kind of our mission is at CAN, is in all of its many different forms. And so I want to, you know, have to leave it at that, you know, but sincere and heartfelt thank you to our three panelists or presenters, panelists, right? Yeah. Diana, Melendez, Atene Robinson, and Belinda Roman. Muchas gracias. Thank you all. Thanks for sharing your thoughts and expertise. This information will be incredibly useful as we work to develop an agenda, right, for Central Texas that can help to not only ensure a more equitable economic recovery from the pandemic, right, but also lead to systemic changes that will become the new normal, as we've talked about, right, and one that is more equitable, you know, and more inclusive. So thanks for sharing again, you know, the powerful words and sentiments and about the powerful work you're doing, and thanks to all of our attendees, right, for participating as well. And we'll send out links to the video, right, and the presentation as soon as we're able to get those together, right? So, so thanks again.
One more
Go right
thing.
ahead. Yeah, parting comments are definitely allowed. Yeah.
I just want to say thank you. Thank you for giving me a platform to speak about my experience with this. It's much appreciated, and I hope I can hopefully inspire and help others to do the same. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much. And we will, like I said, keep hope alive, right? And then we'll echarle ganas también, as we say in Spanish. Yeah, we'll keep.
Thank you.
We'll keep working. We'll keep trying. We'll keep fighting. So, y'all take care. Thank you very much.
Thank you.